Welcome to What Matters Now, the weekly podcast from the Times of Israel, exploring one issue that matters to Israel and the Jewish world right now. I'm your host, Deputy Editor Amanda Borschel-Dan. Today, in the Jerusalem office of the chairman of Yad Vashem, Dani Dayan. Dani, thanks so much for letting me in here today. So, what is the International Holocaust Remembrance Day?
Well, International Holocaust Remembrance Day, January 27th, the day of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau in 1945, was established by the United Nations. And I think this is one of the proofs that actually interest in the Holocaust does not diminish. Actually, it increases as the time goes by. There was no official day of remembrance of the Holocaust back in the 20th century. It was established in the 21st century. By the same token, IRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, an international organization that includes today 35 nations, most of them European, but also the United States, Canada, Australia, Argentina, Israel, was established in the 21st century, not in the 20th century. So there are not many good news in our field of Holocaust remembrance, but one of them is that the interest in the Holocaust is actually increasing. The relevance of the Holocaust, the presence of the Holocaust in the international arena is actually increasing.
I remember when I was in university and Schindler's List came out, and then there was a huge boom of Holocaust studies across the United States. But at that point, as you said, people who wanted to commemorate the Holocaust in a yearly fashion actually latched onto Yom HaShoah, into the Israeli Holocaust Remembrance Day, which is usually around April. So the January date, however, is to commemorate the liberation of Auschwitz, correct?
Yeah, also, Yom HaShoah was set in the adjacent to the date of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. But, both the Jewish people and the international community had to choose one date. We did, the State of Israel, the Jewish people did in the early stages of the existence of the State of Israel. The international community did it much later, but it's important that there is also a day in which the international community unites in remembering the Holocaust.
I mean, obviously, the two dates signify very different things. In Israel, it's very active, the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. The international date is the liberation, the way that the Allies liberated the Jews, saved the Jews.
That's right. But, I am not sure that if Yom HaShoah, the Jewish Day of Remembrance, would have been decided today, necessarily we would choose the day, a date close to the uprising, uprising of the Warsaw Ghetto. I think that our entire perception in the Israeli society of the Shoah, of the Holocaust, has changed. It is today completely different than that existed back in the late 40s or early 50s. One of the original early sins of the Israeli society, we must be sincere and very candid on that, things that today we should be ashamed of, is the way that the Israeli society back in the early years of the state received the Holocaust survivors. In some senses, they made them ashamed of have been persecuted and almost killed. They made them feel ashamed that their relatives were exterminated. Words like, why did you go like a sheep to the slaughterhouse, were used. And in those days, the armed uprising was seen as bravery, as heroism. Today we understand that was a totally erroneous perception of what meant to be a Jew in Europe or Northern Africa during the Shoah. Today we understand that a woman that managed to put some makeup on her face, defying, challenging the attempt of the Nazis to dehumanize her, was also a hero. A person that wrote clandestinely a Sidur Tfilah, a prayer book, in order to be able to share it with his fellow inmates in the Jewish holidays, was a hero, no less, no more, but no less than those that took arms to die with dignity. And today, thank God, I must say, the Israeli society is in a completely different place, and we understand that every Jew, every person that endured the Shoah was by definition a hero.
The memorials this year, the 80th year of the liberation of Auschwitz, are starkly different from what I can see than what was taking place on the 70th. On the 70th, I was at Auschwitz. I was at the ceremonies, my one and only trip to Auschwitz. Very, very memorable, striking trip. And it appears to me that the museum itself, the Auschwitz Museum, is taking charge of it in a way that it didn't 10 years ago, and that any kind of Jewish delegation is a guest of the ceremony versus running it in the way that I saw it on the 70th. I don't know. Were you there on the 70th?
No, I wasn't there in the 70th anniversary, but yes, also Auschwitz, of course, develops also the Jewish pavilion in Auschwitz was designed and is maintained by Yad Vashem for the state of Israel, has been completely rebuilt and the exhibition is completely different, much more engaging and sophisticated and so yes, that's quite obvious. But with all the respect that I have, I do have a lot of respect to the work that is being done by the Auschwitz Museum in Poland. I think that the Shoah is the only historical event that has a peculiar characteristic. Its main place of remembrance is far away from where the events actually happened, and it is Yad Vashem. Yad Vashem is the central place of commemoration in the world for the Shoah, in spite of the fact that Yad Vashem is in Jerusalem, very far from Auschwitz and Treblinka and Majdanek and all the extermination and concentration camps. I understood that on my first day in office as chairman of Yad Vashem. It was August 23rd, 2021. After meeting two Holocaust survivors that still worked in Yad Vashem, I went to tour the campus, the vast campus on Yad Vashem, and I entered the Museum of Art in Yad Vashem, which by itself is quite mind-boggling that when the Nazis tried so hard to dehumanize the Jews, there were still Jews that engaged in the most sublime manifestation of being a human being, which is producing art. And in one of the walls of the museum, I saw a quote, engraved on the wall, a quote by a Jewish painter, a young Jewish painter, Polish Jewish painter, Gela Zekstein. And it's part of her last will that she hid and was recovered after the war. And she writes in August 1942, she writes, and I quote freely, I know I am doomed, I will not survive. Indeed, she didn't. Her husband, their 3-year-old baby daughter were transported to Treblinka and killed there. And she says, I want to bequeath, to donate my works of art to the museum that the Jewish people will establish after the war. Now, when I saw that quote, I almost fainted because it's clear that she means Yad Vashem. I mean, she didn't know that Yad Vashem, it will be called Yad Vashem, or it will be in Jerusalem, and an independent Jewish state, although she was a staunch Zionist. But it's clear that she was referring to Yad Vashem. And that moment, I understood the responsibility that we have. Basically, what we do here is we fulfill 6 million explicit, implicit, written, non-written last wills of the victims. My first decision was actually to put that quote on the wall in my office in Yad Vashem. This is what I see every morning when I come to office, every evening when I leave, and this is basically what gives me the strength to do what we do.
Thank you for sharing that. And we have discussed that quote in the past, and it does actually nail down something that we're trying to do as a paper, The Times of Israel. Since October 7th, we have a project called Those We Have Lost. And we're trying to write a post for every single victim who was murdered by Hamas on October 7th. And I understand the challenges and the importance of really identifying every single person as an individual. And so often, of course, people talk about lahavdil, right? When we compare apples and oranges, people talk about the 6 million. And I believe we've reached something like 5 million plus individual names.
Yeah.
Right. That's such important work. And I know you brought that to the United Nations last year. I can't remember which month, perhaps Yom HaShoah.
It was in January 23, before October 7th.
It was before times. Okay, yeah. Before times. So the country is still reeling from the murders on October 7th. And since then, we've seen often who are our friends and who are not our friends. And at the United Nations, your former friend, Guterres, he, of course, after October 7th, had such terrible statements, and you responded to him. So refresh our memories.
Yeah, I had a very quite close personal relationship with Secretary General Guterres from my days in New York as Israel's Consul General. I was not accredited to the United Nations, but we met several times and we developed a friendly relationship. I also met him in my first visit to New York as chairman of Yad Vashem, and then I suggested that we bring the Book of Names, that huge installation that has almost 5 million individual names, and he agreed immediately, and indeed it was exhibited in the United Nations at the entrance in a very prominent place for 3 weeks. But yes, when on October 7th, Secretary Guterres spoke about understanding the context of the massacre in southern Israel, I criticized him very harshly, both publicly and privately, telling him that it's talking about understanding the context creates the impression that he, under some circumstances or context, the massacre of Jews is something permitted, is something that can be accepted or tolerated. Later came also similar statements, I believe, by the presidents of several American universities that they said that whether calls for genocide of Jews are acceptable in their midst is it depends on the context. Again, the same fallacy, the same outrageous use of the word context. So yes, but you know, when President Biden came to Yad Vashem in the summer of 2022, I told the president that if he wants to understand Israelis and understand the Israeli society, even individual Israelis, but for sure the Israeli society, he has to know that the Shoah, the Holocaust, is omnipresent in the back of our heads somewhere, as individuals and as a collective society. And I was reminded of that on October 7th morning when we started hearing the reports of mothers muffling the mouths of their toddlers in order to prevent them from making noise. I think that everybody associatively, immediately, we thought about so many stories we heard in barns in Poland or in Ukraine or Anne Frank in the attic in Amsterdam. That said, it is important to say October 7th is not the continuation of the Shoah. October 7th is different. There are similarities, of course. Historians in Yad Vashem taught me that you can compare any pair of historical events with what condition. You say what are the similarities, but also what are the differences. There are similarities, the cruelty, the sadism, the intention was genocidal. But there are huge differences. The most important difference is that in October 7th, we were not at the mercy of third parties. In the Shoah, the maximum we could do is to beg President Roosevelt, Prime Minister Churchill to bomb the railways conducting to Auschwitz. In October 7th, we did what we deemed necessary to protect ourselves. The heroism of the members of the security teams of the kibbutzim is similar to the heroism of Mordechai Anilevich or Pavel Frankel in Warsaw Ghetto. But the purpose of their fighting was different. Anilevich and Frankel fought in order to die with dignity. Our soldiers and our security teams died in order to save lives. So this is very important to remember.
Right. Obviously, Israel is a sovereign state that was invaded by a terrorist organization, militia, army. But another friend who has been, I would say, disappointing to many is Pope Francis. And you knew I was going to say his name. Obviously, you are Landsman. You came from the same country. And I don't know if you have a personal relationship with him.
I met him, yes. I met him. I had a private audience with Pope Francis in the Vatican, in his office in the Vatican in June, again in the summer of 2022. It was a very heartwarming one. Obviously, we spoke Spanish. We are both native of the beautiful city of Buenos Aires. And so the first thing we did after I entered his chambers, his office in the Apostolical Palace, was to ask the translator to go home. And it was a very heartwarming conversation, both in the personal level and on the, I would say, historical level. You know that I asked the Pope to open the archives of the Vatican for our researchers, and he agreed, and he told me something that is significant. He told me the Catholic Church is not afraid of history. Go and find whatever you will find there, and that's okay with us. We know, he said, we are not perfect. The Catholic Church is not perfect. And also he told me that always remember that you have an ally here in the war against anti-Semitism and Holocaust remembrance, for Holocaust remembrance. But yes, some of his statements the last months have been extremely disappointing. And I have some hesitation whether I should ask for an additional audience with him in order to set the record straight, or unfortunately, probably it's a lost case.
So what is your hesitation then? Because you often do respond very harshly and quite quickly.
Yeah, but you know, the ability to make him understand his errors on the trade-off between legitimizing them and making him understand. Yes, of course, there are many cases. I have a heated exchange of text messages with the ambassador of the Russian Federation, for instance, after I criticized harshly some statements regarding the Jewish people and the Shoah by his foreign minister. And I'm never shy of standing for what Yad Vashem is.
But right now, we're at such a huge uprising of anti-Semitism globally, right? And the Pope, of course, leads, I think, 1.3 million billion, 1.3 billion Catholics. And I don't know how much he's venerated by each individual Catholic at this point. I don't know how much that is still in play. But he's saying these statements. Of course, people are contradicting him and putting things into context. But what is Yad Vashem's role here? You're the International Holocaust Museum.
Well, first of all, we are not only a museum, we are much more than a museum. But yes, we do our share. Some of them we do it discreetly, some of them we do publicly according to what we consider more appropriate in this situation. But as I said, I will. The question whether should I do it publicly regarding Pope Francis or more privately or in a meeting is a thing that we are considering now.
before you became the head of Yad Vashem, had never been to Germany and Austria, correct?
Correct.
And since you have taken the reins, not only have you been to these countries, but the last time we spoke, you talked about an effort to bring a satellite campus of Yad Vashem to Germany. What is happening with that?
Correct. At a very young age, I think as a teenager, I made a decision not to visit Germany and Austria, the perpetrating countries of the Holocaust. It wasn't about hatred. It was my way to make sure that I remember, I never forget. There is a Jewish custom, not done by many but today, but there are still Jews that leave a patch of their wall unpainted in order to remember that Jerusalem was destroyed 2,000 years ago. That was my way to remember. As an avid traveler, there was one patch in the map of Europe that you never visit because there a terrible crime against my people was designed and carried on. But when I became chairman of Yad Vashem and I received an invitation from the Speaker of the Bundestag, the President of the Bundestag, the German Parliament, to come, I thought that I should do it because that way, as a chairman of Yad Vashem, contrary to a private person, I strengthen memory. And I did it. I met there also the entire German leadership, the president, the chancellor, the prime minister, Olaf Scholz. And in my meeting with Mr. Scholz, I I suggested to him that we open the first educational center of Yad Vashem outside of Israel in Germany. And he immediately agreed. And we are finishing the feasibility study, and the next step will be to decide where it will be located. There are several options, and then to actually build it. We will not build a new building. We will use something that exists, but the educational center itself, the content of the educational center, so it is being advanced. I must say, if you mentioned both Germany and Austria, I must say that I am very worried about political developments in those two countries. In Austria, where I had a very fruitful and close relationship with the former Prime Minister, Karl Nehammer. There were elections, and the largest party today is a party with clear neo-Nazi roots, and probably the next chancellor will be a member of that party. We see that with extreme concern. And also the situation in Germany, in which the so-called Alternative for Germany, the AfD, is gaining popularity and votes. And we will see what happens in the elections that are scheduled for February 23. We monitor the situation there with extreme concern.
It appears to me, as an outsider who knows nothing, that often these elections are turned, at least right now, over the issue of immigrants and the influx that came, especially from the Middle East over the past, 10 years or so. And in many ways, it's almost a similar behavior. Again, lahavdil, comparing apples and oranges to what was happening with the rise of, Nazism and Hitler. It's this sequestering of the other. In this case, it's the immigrants. On the other hand, as Jews, we view this and we think, okay, these people are actually oftentimes those that are responsible for the rise in anti-Semitism throughout Europe. Not always, but often. And you have to wonder what at this point is actually good for the world, good for the Jews. What is happening here, this rise of extremism is, of course, troubling, but it's happening throughout the world. How do you view this?
Well, first of all, I must say that the two parties I mentioned, the Freedom Party in Austria and the Alternative for Germany in Germany, have clear Nazi roots. So it's not only about their present platform, their present politics, but also about remembrance culture, the future of Holocaust remembrance. Austria has made incredible advance from the days it considered itself with a great deal of chutzpah as the first victims of Hitler to the current situation in which the leadership of Austria admits that they are perpetrators, a perpetrating country. If that is reversed, that will be extremely dangerous. Now, without entering on domestic politics of these countries and other European countries, I reject the idea that by being an Islamophobe, you endear yourself to the Jews. We don't need Islamophobia, Islamophobic supporters. We need supporters that understand the value of the Jewish people, the importance of Judaism to the European culture, and not because of they hate someone else.
Thus, the need for an education center in Germany.
Exactly. I told I always tell the leaders I meet, but that's especially the leaders of Germany and Austria, that they say all the right things and they mean it. I'm not claiming that they are not sincere, but the real challenge is to make those values they promote trickle down to the entire civil society. Otherwise, we did nothing, or we did very little. And when I say to trickle down to the civil society, I mean to all parts of the civil society. I told the President Steinmeier of Germany and Chancellor Scholz. I also met the leader of the opposition, Friedrich Merz, that with German citizenship should come a set of values and a set of obligations, set of duties that are irrespective of your ethnicity, irrespective of the question whether your grandparents were in Germany during that dark period or were in any other place around the globe. The moment you become a German citizen, you should commit to a set of obligations that Germany has towards the Jewish people.
And do you feel like Germany, Austria, other countries that let in a lot of immigrants are failing the Jewish people in this regard?
Well, again, it's not necessarily linked to their immigration policy, in which there are different nuances. I must admit that the current leadership of Germany and Austria is committed to both the fight against to 3 points: the fight against anti-Semitism, to fostering and securing, also in the physical sense, Jewish life, and to Holocaust remembrance. Will that continue in the years or the decades coming ahead? I don't know. We will have to work with them closely to monitor them and to turn on red lights when they see them, if they will see them deviating from that path.
Because, of course, it's in Berlin that the chief of police advised Jews and gays not to go into certain neighborhoods, right?
Yeah. As I said, it has to trickle down to the civil society.
We are living in the after period, the post-October 7th period. And do you feel like your role, the role of Yad Vashem, has shifted in any way?
Well, immediately after October 7th, when I started hearing what is happening in campuses, especially in the United States, but also in Europe, I was appalled. I am very familiar with the Ivy League institutions especially in the East Coast, where I represented Israel for 4 years, and I know them very intimately. And I decided to go to see by myself what happens. And I traveled to the East Coast of the US, basically to New York and Philadelphia, in the late November 2023, some 6 weeks after October 7th. And I was terrified with what I saw. There was completely different from what I remember. When I was there, of course, I saw anti-Semitism and strong anti-Israel sentiment, but nothing compared to the feel of the Jewish students of being ostracized from the community and the ineptitude of the leadership of those universities to act. I told the two ladies that were then presidents of Columbia and UPenn, University of Pennsylvania, since then they were forced to resign. I told them that they act like traffic officers and not like academic leaders. Traffic officers decides where you can demonstrate, which plastic card, magnetic card will open which door for whom, who can enter campus. But our expectation from them is completely different, is to take a moral leadership. And eventually they will have to confront the question, is our calls for the elimination, is advocacy for the elimination of the Jewish state permitted, morally permitted, part of the legitimate discourse in their academic institutions? When I presented that question to them, their immediate answer was, First Amendment and freedom of speech and academic freedom. And I told them, Madam President, you know exactly like I do, that if a professor of sociology in your campus, in your college, will write a book claiming that LGBTQ people should be ostracized from society for this reason or for that reason, it also is freedom of speech and academic freedom, but you will fire him or her the following day. By the way, rightly so. On the other hand, if he or she writes a book claiming that we should act actively to eliminate the Jewish state, most chances he or she will be promoted. So academic freedom or freedom of speech are pretexts and not the reason. And I even told them something that it was quite difficult for me to say. I told them, Madam, in the 1920s, the University of Heidelberg in Germany was a beacon of liberalism. 10 years later, it became a cesspool of racism and bigotry and eugenics and race theory, etc., etc. And you should consider how Harvard or Columbia or UPenn will be remembered, like the University of Heidelberg or like an institution that stood against bigotry and racism against the Jews, anti-Semitism, etc. And unfortunately, I still see that most measures are logistical, increase security for the Jewish students, etc., and not moral leadership. And that is extremely worrying. I see still pseudo-academic, pseudo-intellectual, pseudo-scientific theory being built in those institutions, piece by piece, article by article, lecture by lecture, book by book, that call for the extermination. There is no other way of the Jewish state, and that is extremely worrying.
And so, besides speaking to the presidents, are you, as an institution, creating some kind of body of literature to counteract this? What?
Yes, definitely. We hold an annual seminar for faculty and administrators, especially from the United States, that come to Yad Vashem to learn about the Holocaust, but also about anti-Semitism. I also, in my recent visit to Sydney, I had a similar conversation with the Chancellor of the University of Sydney, and probably we will do also with them a similar program. Yes, we try to confront. That said, we should remember, Yad Vashem is about the Shoah. It's not about anti-Semitism in general. My motto is that 6 million Jews that were exterminated in the Shoah, deserve an institution that is exclusively dedicated to them. But obviously there are adjacent fields like genocide in general, anti-Semitism, that we cannot and we do not want to evade dealing with them.
Dani, I could speak with you for another hour, but thank you so much for giving me so much time today.
Thank you. A pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's What Matters Now. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan. If you have any comments or questions about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. Until next week, Shalom.